Hi everyone, welcome to Privacy Now. I'm Mike Fibus. You know, the future of online privacy for children is at a real crossroads this fall. Will the protections now in place at the FTC be weakened? Or will Congress enact new laws to strengthen the privacy protections? We're fortunate to have with us someone who has been front and center of this issue, and that's Josh Golin. Josh is Executive Director of the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, so you've had a busy October so far. You were down in Washington for workshops on children's privacy. Tell us how it went and why you were there.
Sure. So the FTC is considering changes to the rules for the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. That is the only law that we have that protects children's privacy online and what data can be collected from them and how you can collect it and when you need to get parental permission and how you can use it. And the FTC held a workshop earlier this month to discuss how COPPA was working and what changes people wanted to see. It was a really interesting day. On each panel, there was basically one consumer advocate and then 5 or 6 people representing industry. We take that, the makeup of the panels, as well as some of the questions that they were asking, to be a really concerning sign that they are looking to weaken COPPA. And you know, it was a long day, and it was a highly technical day, getting into a lot of the technical details about COPPA. But one of the things that was really clear and really emerged from the workshop is that you know, industry's position is going to be that the FTC's most recent enforcement action against YouTube, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about as well, but that was the most significant enforcement action that they've ever taken. And that is going to essentially ruin the children's media industry was the message we heard over and over again. And we heard a lot of really, you know, I wish I had brought my violin with me. We heard a lot of sob stories about children with special needs and how they were going to be neglected because apparently the only way, according to industry, that you can provide the adaptive technologies that kids with special needs need is to data mine everyone. So we even heard the president of the App Association told a story about how he had recently heard a child using one of these technologies tell his mother for the first time that he loved her. And that if the FTC was serious about enforcing COPPA, that wouldn't be something that would be possible in the future. So, you know, I thought it was pretty cynical, some of the things that the industry was trotting out. I think they are clearly worried about the YouTube decision because for years, the business model in children's media, whether it's been apps or websites or user-generated platforms like YouTube, has been to ignore the law. And we got our most major enforcement action in early September. And so now I think that the industry is going on offensive and sees this workshop and this request for comments as an opportunity to roll things back. And obviously, we oppose any efforts to roll things back and actually want to see the law strengthened.
So that surprises me from a couple of aspects. I would have thought that Google, you know, the parent of YouTube or Alphabet, would have viewed 170 million, I think it was, as sort of just another cost of doing business. I mean, much as, you know, Facebook seems to just let these would seem like massive fines to us just roll off and continue doing what they're doing. So I'm actually surprised, unless, you know, they're happy to continue on risking fines, but if they can make it less.
I don't think they're particularly concerned about the fine, and for me, the fine was the weakest part of the settlement. I think what they are concerned about is that the settlement is forcing them to make changes to their business model for children's content, and so what we see as the most important part of that settlement is that content providers or content creators are going to have to designate whether their content is child directed when they upload it to YouTube. And if it is child directed, then YouTube will severely limit the data collection from those videos, and they won't serve behavioral advertising. And for us, that's really important. That's what COPPA was designed to do, was to prevent data being used for personalized advertising. Children are very vulnerable to advertising to begin with. When you start micro-targeting them based on, the last 15 videos they watched and the websites that they visit and their interests and their geolocation and all those things that, go into advertising to all of us when we're online. And when you start using those very sophisticated technologies to children, it's unfair. But I think that's what YouTube is worried about. I think that they're worried about it, that their children's content is going to be less profitable because they're not going to be able to market to children and collect data in this way. So I totally agree. From a monetary standpoint, the settlement was, I wouldn't even call it a slap in the wrist, more like a little tap on the finger. But the injunctive relief is actually pretty serious. And for years, it's been this open secret that millions of children are on YouTube every day. And that they're being marketed to in a way and having their data collected in a way that the law prohibits, and the FTC getting serious about that, I think has industry scared, because their business runs on data collection and personalized marketing.
Currently, I mean, television seemed to be a pretty effective strategy in the day before there were so many other options, when you didn't know who the viewer was. So I assume there's still money to be made even without knowing who, which children are watching and what their past behavior is.
I would assume so too. And let me be clear, I work for the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. We're not thrilled about any kind of marketing to children, but I think that's, I think one of the scare tactics that industry is engaged in right now is saying, oh, this is going to mean that there's no way to make a profit off of media for children, and so it's all going to go away. And if you ask a parent, do you want Google to collect information about your children so that they can advertise to them more effectively? Nobody's going to say yes. But if you say, how would you feel if YouTube went away and your kids could never watch it? Well, then you're going to get a little more of a mixed reaction. If your kid is watching a Barbie video to target, based on the fact that that audience is interested in Barbie, without knowing the last 15 videos or personalizing it for that child beyond what they're watching at that moment, I think is probably pretty effective. Kids are very vulnerable and respond very much to advertising. So I think it is a scare tactic, but I guess, it probably will cut into profit somewhat. And that's one of the reasons why they're up in arms. And also probably because we're in this greater conversation about children and privacy. I mean, about all of us in privacy. And I think one of the things that industry is probably doing is we need to dig in everywhere, because this big federal privacy law, which we all expect will come at some point, we don't want to give an inch anywhere.
Talk about the fairness issue. Tell us specifically what makes it less fair for children than
Sure.
for us.
So one of the things that we know about children is that from studies of child development and looking at their understanding of advertising, is that they don't understand advertising the same way that adults do. Up until they're about the ages of 4 or 5, they usually have difficulty even identifying that something is an ad. But at that age, they're usually able to say that is an ad. But what they don't understand really until about 9 or 10 usually is advertising's persuasive intent. So what that means is that when a child sees an advertisement, they treat that information the same way that they would treat it if it came from a teacher or a parent or some other trusted source, someone who didn't have a vested interest in trying to sell them on something. And one of the, as adults, probably the best defense we have against advertising is when we see it. We know what the ad is trying to do. It might still be effective on us. In fact, it frequently is, because one of the things brands do is they target our emotions and they get around our cognitive processes. But at least we have that awareness. When I watch a car commercial, I know that the people who are making that car commercial have made it specifically because they want me to buy a car. Children don't really understand developmentally. They're not ready to understand that until they get to be around 9 or 10 years old. And what's interesting actually about those studies that have been done on children's understanding of advertising is that most of them come from the television days. And what we also know is that children recognize advertising easier and younger if it's clearly delineated as advertising. Because there's this idea that children need these cues. We'll be right back after these messages. I'm sure we all remember that one from when we were kids. They need these cues to understand that something different is happening in the commercial. So on the internet, where none of those cues exist, and in fact, as somebody who studies this stuff for a living, I frequently have a hard time, figuring out if that influencer has actually been paid to say what they're saying to me, or they just have genuinely love that razor that they're talking about. So when I'm talking about, the progression of kids, starting to understand persuasive intent at 9 or 10, when the content is less clear what's advertising and what's not, those capabilities don't really develop until around the ages of 12 or 13. So to use that sophisticated, algorithms, everything they know about us from offline and online to personalize that marketing is, I believe is fundamentally unfair. I believe it's unfair to advertise to a child in any way until they understand it. But it's particularly unfair to use these techniques which have been, which are A/B tested, which are, personalized, which are designed to be, to follow you around the internet and make it feel almost like they're inside your brain. And for a kid who has no idea how any of that is happening, right? I mean, you and I, we do this for a living. We have a sense of why that sneaker ad is following me around the internet. A child doesn't. It's just, wow, sneakers. And so we really think that that children should be excluded from this corporate surveillance that we've all traded for free content, and we do have a law that actually says that children are not supposed to be part of this.
Yeah, and it's my recollection that children are defined as 13 and under, and if I remember right, then what you said is it helped explain it developmentally.
Yeah, it's actually under 13. So 13-year-olds can get the behavioral marketing, but 12-year-olds can't.
Okay, and there's nothing to tier a 12-year-old versus a 5-year-old at this point, right?
No, there's nothing to tier a 12-year-old versus a 5-year-old. It's just you can and again, contextual advertising is legal, and in fact, ways that I think are highly deceptive and unfair to children are legal on the internet. Things that wouldn't be legal on children's television. I mean, the whole unboxing phenomenon, which has become, probably one of the biggest genres on YouTube for children, where kids are opening up toys and talking about them excitedly, and getting paid by toy companies and retailers to do that. This is, and then basically producing 15-minute infomercials. This would not be allowed on children's television, and it is on the internet. So we only have one law that protects children from commercial exploitation while they're on mobile or the internet, and that's COPPA. And that's why it's so important that we at least keep those protections, if not expand them.
So yeah, that makes sense. And there is another front now, the bipartisan legislation before Congress at some stage. Is that moving forward? Do you have hopes that it will?
So the Markey-Hawley bill is still in early stages. It's been introduced. The goal really is to get some more bipartisan support. Josh Hawley has been a tremendous champion on children's media issues and privacy issues, and is one of the co-sponsors of the bill. Ed Markey, who has been the champion for children's privacy since day one, and in fact was one of the authors of the original COPPA bill, is the other co-sponsor. That, really the goal right now is to get some more Republicans on that. That bill would do a number of things which I think are really important. First of all, it would flat out ban personalized marketing to children under the age of 13. What you have right now is in COPPA is that you have to get parental consent before you do that. And for what most companies have just taken that to mean we're not going to do it. But we know that at some point, Google or Amazon or Facebook or somebody is going to dip their toe in the water and say, if we send a confusing enough privacy policy and say, if your kid wants to use this service, you have to consent to having their data collected for personalized marketing, that parents will probably sign it, because who reads those things? So that's one thing that's really important that the bill does. It also extends some privacy protections to teens, where it wouldn't be parental permission, but teens would have to opt in order to get this behavioral marketing. And also, really importantly, you couldn't condition a service on and participation on saying that you had to agree to that. So, because you could imagine if you told a 14-year-old, if you want to join Snapchat, you have to agree to have this kind of exploitative marketing happening to you in data collection, every 14 in the world would say yes. And then the last thing that it would do, which I think is also really important, is it would change the burden on operators from a actual knowledge standard to a constructive knowledge standard. And what that means is right now the law says you have to get parental permission before you collect data from children on child-directed content, or if you have actual knowledge that they're on your general audience site, which is what YouTube claimed to be for years. They claimed that they were a general audience site, so that way, and they claimed that they didn't have actual knowledge that children were using the site. A constructive knowledge standard is much easier to prove. It says that you should know that children are on your site, and you have a duty to investigate if you believe that children might be on your site. Instead of me saying, I know. Oh, I didn't know that Mike's children were on the site, so therefore I wasn't knowingly collecting personal information from them. What it says is, if you have reason to believe that Mike's children might be on the site, you have to investigate and make sure you're not collecting data from them unless you're getting that parental permission first. So those three things: the extending privacy protections for teens, the constructive knowledge standard, and the banning of the targeted marketing completely are things that we're really excited about.
Okay. Do you think that that goes far enough? I mean, do you have a vision of what your ideal would be? I mean, short of no commercials at all, which I know is the vision, but realistically, folks who produce have to make some money somehow.
Yeah, well, we have ideas for how that could happen too, but part of what I think that these protections should be extended to age 17. And I think that, until somebody turns 18, you shouldn't be allowed to collect this personal information from a minor, I think would be the ideal thing. I think that also, I think that the law could be strengthened, and maybe the law doesn't need to be strengthened. Maybe we just need more enforcement action and more guidance from the FTC. But there's a number of things around COPPA which are in there but are routinely ignored, and so have just become essentially defang the law. So things like keeping information forever is one thing that drives me nuts. And the law says you're only supposed to keep it for as long as you need it for the purpose that you collected it originally. So take something like voice recordings, which are now becoming a huge thing with all the home assistants, not to mention internet connected toys that use voice. And the first voice assistants in the past year, we saw Amazon coming out with the Echo Dot Kids, which is specifically for children, the first voice assistant specifically for children, but obviously they're using their parents' voice assistants too. So take something like that, and what they're doing is they're keeping the voice recordings forever. And if you think about how a home assistant works, it's that as soon as they record you, that's immediately being translated into text and intent by the voice recording. So, as soon as I say, Alexa, play me Bruce Springsteen, it's putting in the intent. It knows that I like Bruce Springsteen. There's no reason to keep the recording of me saying, or a child saying, probably no children like Bruce Springsteen, but that's another story. But there's no reason for it to keep that recording. And in fact, the law says that they have to delete it as soon as they're done with the original intent. But what's happened is companies have reinterpreted that to mean, if a parent contacts us, we will delete their recordings, or we will delete the information that we have about a child if they contact us. But really, that's not what the law says. It says that you should only supposed to keep it as long as for the purpose that you collected it. So if we could either legislatively or through guidance from the FTC or through a series of enforcement actions really send a message that this information is not yours to hold forever, I think that would be a huge step forward, because obviously the longer you keep things, the more chances you have of misuse, the more chances you have of data breaches, and frankly, even the companies themselves shouldn't be using it once they have the reason that they kept it. So that's something that I think would be really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. I mean, the analyst in me understands the inherent value of data, and we don't know what it will be tomorrow. And in fact, I have clients, hardware clients, not folks like Google or Facebook, that actually do have a permission statement and collect the data and do nothing with it. And they're reticent to give it up because what if we want to figure something out? Now that's not children, but I do get it. But but there has to be protections on it. I mean, much more stringent protections.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that data is a commodity, and you probably know better than I do, but the business model is collect as much as you can and monetize what you can now, and maybe we'll figure out a way to, storage is so cheap, right? So it's worth holding on to everything because we might figure out a way to monetize it later or improve a product later. But when it comes to children, I think they should be excluded from that. I think there's too much harm that can happen from breaches. There's also the fact that you collected that data for a very specific purpose, and that's probably what you got our parents' permission to collect it for, was something very specific. And so keeping it forever and figuring out a purpose later really goes against the spirit of how that data was collected.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting that in Europe with GDPR, the right to be forgotten is making advancements, but that's I'll call it the visible internet, the undergirdings. Folks like Google and Facebook, it's a very different story, but you arguably have a right to be forgotten down there too, underneath.
I think we do. I mean, I don't know how you do that technically and legislatively, but I do think that I think that that's really important actually, because we are all creating so many data points about us, and we all know the extent that can come back and hurt us in discriminating against us, hurt our future, children's future opportunities, and we don't need the world's largest permanent record on children. I mean, I remember how scared we used to get when we were kids, right? They would say, if you do this, it's going on your permanent record. And that would be one of the ways the teachers would threaten us. Well, now kids are growing up in an environment where literally everything they say and do in the multitude of hours that they're spending online, which, many kids, a majority of their waking hours, they're spending online these days. And to think that that's all going into a permanent record doesn't seem right to me.
That's true. I mean, yeah, it's a potentially public venue to where, I mean, the things that I didn't have a venue like that for when I was 13, certainly I definitely wouldn't want that around today for sure. I know, I have a lot more questions, but we are way out of time. Let me just ask you one more. If I could ask you one more question, what would it be?
I think that one of the things that was very concerning at the hearing was to hear some of the peoples on the panels and even one of the FTC commissioners say that COPPA was created primarily to protect children from stranger danger and from interacting with strangers on the internet and all the fears that go with that. And certainly that was part of the intent, but a huge part of the intent and why the law was actually pretty prescient was to protect children from this highly, highly, highly sophisticated marketing. And I think that, when we're talking about Google's algorithms and the massive amount that Google knows about all of us versus a 6-year-old, that is just a completely unfair fight. And so I think it's really, really important when we think about the dangers of the internet. We don't think about about how this very sophisticated, persuasive technology, how it can change the way we think, how it can change our values, how it can change the way our actual identities. For children growing up, it can actually shape their identities. And so they need to be protected from this kind of thing. And of course, we need to worry about strangers contacting our children on the internet, but we also need to worry about Google and Facebook and Amazon and all of the other companies contacting our children on the internet. And we need to make sure that if they do it in a very prescribed way and under a real clear set of rules.
Yeah, they're a different kind of stranger, but no less potentially dangerous.
That's right.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for joining us. Until next time, bye-bye.